morning, good afternoon to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from all across North America and the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I am the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us. And special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Streamline AI, and our fantastic presenters today, Kathy Zhu and Ilan Hornstein, who are going to teach us metrics that matter and how to transform legal insights into showcasing business impact. This is our 13th event of the year. Let's get to today's event. Metrics that matter for in-house counsel, transforming legal insights into showcasing business impact. Our panel is led by Kathy Zhu. Kathy is the co-founder and CEO of Streamline AI, a legal process management platform purpose-built for in-house legal teams to handle intelligent intake, workflow automation, collaboration, data knowledge management, and reporting. Kathy was most recently Associate General Counsel at DoorDash, where she spent 4 years building commercial legal and legal operations functions from the ground up and supported the company's growth from $4 billion to over $70 billion in valuation. Kathy started her career as a corporate lawyer at Wilson Sonsini, advising over 30 startups through venture financing, M&A, and IPOs. Following that, she spent 4 years at Medallia, a customer experience management software platform where she was promoted to director of commercial legal. In her free time, Kathy is a dedicated meditator. I saw a mediator. I guess I have my law hat on. It's much better to be a meditator, not a mediator. Maybe it's the same thing, but she's a dedicated meditator, golden doodle mom, and a scuba enthusiast. She is joined by Ilan Hornstein. Ilan is a technology company legal executive with over 20 years of engineering, business, and legal experience. He currently serves as Vice President, Deputy General Counsel of 8x8, where he oversees 8x8's global commercial, legal, product and IP, corporate, and legal ops teams. Prior to 8x8, Ilan served as a Chief Legal Officer, Corporate Secretary, and Head of Business Ops for Nauto, a computer vision AI company focused on helping human drivers be safer on the roads. Earlier in his career, Ilan was responsible for global technology and commercial deals for TiVo and advised technology companies at the international law firms of Sidley Austin and Bingham McCutcheon. Ilan is also the inventor and founder of Beyond NDA, the world's first business enablement network, providing a free service that eliminates the need to sign NDAs. So if you don't like NDAs, you have to check out Beyond NDA, and Ilan will talk more about that, I'm sure, later on. In any event, I'm thrilled to welcome Kathy and Ilan to In-House Connect. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Kathy to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shai. It's wonderful to be back here again. I love this community. I love the energy that everyone brings. So we want to keep this, very conversational, collaborative. Please, as we go along, feel free to ask us questions, comment in the chat, and we'll keep this dialogue going. I'm so excited to be here with Ilan. Ilan and I have known each other for many years now, and we're both here to talk to you about a topic that we are super passionate about, which is metrics. So let's start this webinar by first busting some myths. And then what we'll do is we'll go on and demystify key performance indicators, or commonly known as KPIs, before diving into the meat and substance of this presentation. So you'll see 2 myths on this slide, and they reflect how many lawyers have commonly approached the topic of tracking metrics with a lot of trepidation. So as a result, there's been a real blocker to legal teams rallying around the need to track metrics. If the team does not believe in metrics, then even if you have the best intentions in leading the team and you want everyone to engage in this exercise, it ultimately won't be successful. So if you are planning to implement metrics tracking, KPI tracking for the first time with your team, my strong recommendation is to first unearth all the elephants in the room and talk through them. Make sure you understand if anyone has doubts, if anyone has fears, and, really make sure that their concerns are heard. So let's just bust these 2 myths. The first is legal performance can't be measured by numbers, right? I think, historically, a lot of attorneys, legal professionals have seen and believe that legal performance is very much a qualitative thing, right? So to bust that myth, stay tuned because for the rest of the presentation, both Elon and I will talk about all the ways that legal performance absolutely can be measured by numbers. And that's also the language of the business, right? If we can speak in the language of the business, then the business teams will also regard us as true partners. They'll actually understand the value, right, that we're bringing to the table. The second myth is that measuring performance actually hurts or can hurt work experience or culture. My experience has really been the opposite of this. One of the memories that stay with me from my time at DoorDash was actually the monthly all hands meetings we would have with the entire legal team. And every department would have its leader presenting the highlights of the prior month. And because my team, which is the commercial legal team, we tracked our work, we could bring data and metrics to the table. I'd be able to report on the volume of all the different types of contracts coming in, sales contracts, vendor contracts, partnership contracts, percentage increases, tons and tons of different data. And it was a really effective way to actually quantify the impact my team was making. And it helped the rest of the legal team understand the value of our work more concretely. And it was a huge morale boost as well. Elon, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these two myths. How should the legal teams be weighing in? Yeah, here.
Kathy, and you're hitting the nail on the head with this, because if you think about how every function shows up to the reviews with the, either the C team or in quarterly business reviews with the leadership or the extended leadership, and legal is the only one showing up without numbers, without performance metrics, without ways of showing it, then this calls into question the maturity of the legal executive. And so for those of you who are legal executives out there, you know how important it is to be data driven. And so I think that there are really concerns like that are expressed in these myths, but these are things to actually try to tackle, not reasons for not doing metrics. And there are really metrics that can help you to tell how you might be performing or outperforming expectations, right? You can look at the snapshots of the work that you do or the breakouts of the activities that you do. And so these things are simple, non-threatening things you can do. And we'll get more into that later.
Awesome. I love that, the maturity of the legal executive. I think that really ties in nicely to this next slide, which unpacks the why now behind legal teams measuring and analyzing performance with metrics. Elon, I'd love to know, throughout your career, have you seen a shift in how legal teams are being held accountable, and also maybe how teams are being resourced in recent years?
Absolutely. So what I've seen happening is this new CLO thing that's emerging. More and more general counsels are chief legal officers. And this is not a legal role. It's, especially in more tech companies, it is a overall executive role in the company, and it starts with how you run your own teams. So yeah, there is an idea that maybe GCs and CLOs have not really been, untouched by this change to data-driven culture. But in reality, you wouldn't be in your positions if you hadn't invested in your relationships and worked to, ensure that you have influence on the company's success. And what that really means is that you're impacting key metrics of the company, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, awesome. We'd love to also hear the audience's observations and thoughts on these trends too. Have you seen a shift happening in recent years where there's now more emphasis from the C-suite on metrics? The new title that Elon mentioned of the CLO, is that something that you've seen emerging, and have you wondered, how do I work up to that? Or maybe you are a CLO and you want to comment on how metrics play a role in the performance of your duties. So let's go to the next poll. We want to hear from you. What is your primary goal in tracking legal metrics? Why are you here today? What are you here to learn? Do you want to improve operational efficiency? Is your main goal to reduce legal spend, maybe speed up legal request turnaround time, or enhance compliance and risk management, strengthen team accountability and performance? Or maybe it's something else. If it's something else, put it in the chat. We'd love to hear.
Yeah,
it looks like we have some early leaders here going up. I don't know if it's just people picking choice number one, but it looks like we've got some early leaders in the poll here around operational efficiency and, team accountability, performance.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm also seeing a number of people put in the chat that they want to demonstrate value and need. We'll be speaking to that a lot because there is a real need for legal to emphasize its brand, right? To really build its brand within the business.
And I just noticed a couple of people put in all of the above, which I love. I guess we should have had that as an additional thing, everything.
That's right.
Yeah, I personally think obviously all of these are important things, but it does look like we've got quite a good breakout. I think voting seems to have stabilized.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so maybe we can keep moving on. Shai, what do you think?
Sure. So just to recap, 43% want to improve operational efficiency, followed by 31% strengthen team accountability and performance. And then other is 11%, as we alluded to before. And then there's enhanced compliance and risk management and reduce legal spend and increase legal request turnaround time. So a lot of great responses. Back to you, Kathy and Ilan.
Awesome. Thank you, Shai. Hopefully that's illuminating for the audience as well to hear. All right. So moving on now to discussing, and hold on a sec, I'm just trying to close out on this window. Okay, so now moving on to talking about metrics versus KPIs. So a theme that we'll be emphasizing during this presentation is that data is good, but collecting data just for the sake of doing it is not the point. What we really need to do is to use the data as a way to measure how we're progressing towards a certain goal, right? Because let's face it, numbers don't mean very much in a silo. You really need to put it into context to understand the overarching narrative in order for the numbers to be meaningful. So what I recommend is to start with your goals first. What is it that you want to achieve for the team? And then you work from there to see what numbers and what data you need to track and to improve to get you there to that goal. And that's really the point of KPIs. You're using these metrics as a way to measure progress towards a key objective. So Ilan, I know you've done a lot of work on this at your previous roles and also at 8x8. Could you share with us, your experience setting KPIs for your team, your opinion on the overall OKR process? How do you approach that?
Yeah, and it is a challenge and it has to be done thoughtfully. There is a fear in legal departments as lawyers, and I remember when I started out, the same thing where, there's a fear because legal is always blamed. That's the experience, right? When things are slow, when sales are slow, when, something hasn't happened, it's just so easy to just throw legal under the bus, right? Well, it took forever to get something done. And so lawyers, who have experienced this might be afraid that now there's just going to be data to back up all these things to blame them. But we all know how hard our teams are working. And we all know that we're actually impacting the business and how much time we're spending actually impacting the business. And so one approach I've used is to convince my team, and I did that, but you have to convince them that you will, is keep the metrics internal first to try them out. And metrics really are meant to be useful too. So it's really good to actually, if you have not yet measured anything or done metrics or KPIs, is try it out internal to the team first. And that can help people to understand how to figure out whether a metric works and what does it drive. And then behind the scenes, work to identify the business goals you can impact. And by helping to steer people, you can start to show them that the metrics not only measure their own performance, but it helps you to, figure out how to understand your impact on the rest of the business. And we'll definitely dive into more detail on that to show you some specific things that truly demonstrate that, there's no need to be fearful and, you can help the business get better.
Thanks, Ilan. And exactly to Ilan's point, we're going to go into details on some of that because I'm seeing in the chat people asking about what might be causing bottlenecks and tracking that data. We're going to unpack and demystify all of that. And I love Ilan's focus on, experimentation, right? You don't have to look at this as the final thing. Try it out and see where that takes you. So now let's move into the substantive content of today's presentation. And I'll quickly just explain what we're about to cover in the upcoming slides. So here you can see we're going to discuss why KPIs matter, and then how to connect legal KPIs with overall company level KPIs, company level objectives. Then we'll talk about what a good KPI looks like, how to design a good KPI, and then we'll go into more specific examples of KPIs for each different legal department and give you some nuggets so that you can get started. And we'll also be sharing resources in the chat, so ebooks and best practices. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. And so, yeah, let's move on to this slide. So we're going to talk about why do KPIs matter for legal teams. Ilan, turning it over to you. Could you share with us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and this goes back to our point that it's really about showing that you're executing. And I also saw that mentioned in the chat, and to emphasize it, it's a way to demonstrate what you're doing, but it's also a way to drive your own action to prioritize things. You have a team, or maybe you're a part of a team. How do you know that what you're doing is just perfect? And do you believe it's perfect? And if it's not perfect, how can you figure out where to focus? How do you figure out that you are, having some allocation of your resources in the right spots? And so these are key uses for KPIs, and it matters for a legal team to find them, because in the absence of that, you're making decisions that you are, may not be, informed well, or you might not be taking any decisions. You're just operating the way you operated yesterday, and that's how you'll operate tomorrow. I started my career before law school at Raytheon, and at Raytheon, we had a big emphasis on data. And so I was trained in Six Sigma and TQM, Total Quality Management. And one of the core concepts is, and I've seen this quote attributed to Peter Drucker, but is you can't improve what you're not measuring. So that means you need to measure what you want to improve. And some areas in legal lend themselves very well to KPIs and tracking. Commercial legal is a good example of that. And it's a good idea to focus on those areas that you can do good APIs.
Great. So now, you can see on the slides too, right, that we give you lots of reasons and examples and explanations around, the benefits of tracking KPIs for legal. Ilan, I'd love to, again, turn it over to you and hear from you some examples of the KPIs that you've used in the updates that you've given to, maybe your leadership team on legal team's performance.
Yeah, and so, for this discussion, and we welcome the feedback and question, we can talk about it, and we'd love to engage on this. So the things I picked on as easy metrics that we would present as a legal team at our quarterly business reviews are a snapshot of our work. So, and we started measuring this data because we had a great tool that allows us to measure the data. And so we could tell people that the average time for someone to wait for legal assistance was 7 hours. And the average time that legal worked on something took about 24 hours of work. The average time the legal team was waiting on others was 16 days. And the average time to complete was 18 days. And so this data was extremely powerful to show that, yes, it took 18 days to complete on average something. 16 days was spent waiting on others. And I don't know how many of you, have a similar experience, but, this is the kind of powerful metric that you can, use to show people that even if it takes 18 days, the legal team is highly efficient. The other thing that I was able to do with the tool we have is to actually break out our activity. And I was able to show that we have about 50% of our legal resources spent on sales support. Well, guess what? People don't really know what all those lawyers are doing in the company. And so, this showing how much support you give sales is a key indicator. And so for us, I actually love Streamline AI, which is the tool that I use. And Kathy and I have known each other for a long time because I happened to meet Kathy at a lawyer event, and we were talking, and she told me about it. And one of the amazing things that Streamline AI does, it tracks whether work is with lawyers or whether it is with the business or with outside law firms. And that's sort of my next one, that, another KPI I look at is service provider performance. I have been astonished at the rates that law firms now want to charge for first-year associates. And so, but to me, with high rates comes high performance. So we actually added in, a category in our waiting on to say outside counsel. And I look at that. And if I see really long times on waiting on outside counsel, then that's going to help me to figure out how to talk to the partners about the bills. And so, these are the key metrics that I think are easy metrics to start with. And back to the initial point I mentioned, which is that if you show your team that you can prove with data that they're actually doing a good job, and that they will no longer need to worry about the whole, well, I was waiting on legal, and in reality, legal is waiting on others. That's just going to, be amazing for them. And they're going to want this data out there because they're going to want it known. And this is real data from us. And so, we will talk a little bit more about picking KPIs and making sure you match that to the tool you have. To my knowledge, there isn't really another way. I had originally coded my own Jira thing where I put all the workflows in Jira that I wanted, but this amazing thing to track where the work is just outstanding for legal metrics.
Thank you so much, Alon. And I love that. The emphasis on really getting a nuanced look into what's happening, right? Because not all work is created equal. So if you're just tracking the volume, you're not getting a true understanding of where the holdup really is. And I thought you gave some really fantastic examples there.
And I think, this actually goes right into our next slide here on creating stakeholder-focused KPIs. And I saw the comment in the chat talking about cross-functional measures. And I agree that cross-functional measures are excellent. However, it's really hard to do cross-functional measures, right? Especially because you need to be able to track it. And so you can think about, I don't know how many of your companies use an OKR process, objective and key results, right? But you're likely to have some sort of thing with some sort of name where you have goals that are set at the top, and then need to go down and people have to execute around it. And so I want to talk briefly about two approaches you can take. One, which, is the case for many functions, but often not legal, is you just align. So you have the objective and key results at the top level, and then you pick one of those key results, and then you make that your objective. And then you figure out what key results can show that you're achieving that objective, which then automatically, basically cascades from the top down. And so, cascading down OKRs is one strategy. That's much easier for sales. If the top goal is increase 20% sales, then, sales can just take that as their next thing and do that. For legal, often you have to just align though. And so you need to think about how can your team support another team to accomplish its work. Examples are, there might be international launches, product launches, or entity management, which is something that I decided to tackle and to measure. So, this is a way of adding value by reducing waste and overhead. And so what we did is we wanted to eliminate a certain number of entities, challenging ones that create high admin overhead. And so we set a target for that. And so that was a way of us aligning to a reduction in overhead in our company because we could focus on it. And then we start tracking it as a key indicator. How many subsidiaries do we have? And setting a target for a reduction.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Alon. I love the concrete examples because I do think it is often challenging for us to know how can we actually tie right into these business objectives that feel many clicks removed right from the work that we're doing. And the point that I want to add here is that legal historically has had a brand management challenge, and we've kind of talked about this thematically already. I have this image in my mind of us slaving away at our desks, and there's a line of angry business people, right, all standing on the other side of the desk, and they're asking about where is this thing that I needed yesterday. I learned recently that this isn't just an image in my mind. It's actually from a painting from the 16th century called The Village Lawyer. So this, image has existed with our profession for hundreds of years. And the reason is because there is a really huge disconnect, right, between the stakeholder perception and what's actually happening. And a big aspect of that, I think, the big cause of that is that legal doesn't communicate the demand on its services or its output in a very granular fashion. So business teams feel like they're in the dark on what's happening. And so, my recommendation actually is to sit down with the business leaders of those functions that have this misconception and create joint KPIs that you can then track, because in that way, you're actually bringing them into the solution. And you're ensuring that they're invested in this partnership to help legal become successful. So based on my experience and my peers, that I've heard from as well, companies where sales teams are very much invested in bringing down the waiting on time that Alon mentioned and speeding up the ability for legal to do its work faster, that results in a more empowered experience for the legal team as well, right? And happier and more engaged employees. So that's another way of kind of tying legal KPIs together with business objectives. So just extending that same topic a little bit further, I think it's also possible to think about different ways in which legal goals directly can impact and influence the outcome of the business objectives. So for example, if the business goal is we want to create the best in class product for a category, or we want to, decrease churn by a certain percentage, you can really start to break that down and think about what are some of the things that the legal team can do, right? For the example I gave about the best in class product, and maybe, we want to be seen as the most cutting edge company in our category. Maybe you can start tracking the number of individuals that are submitting inventions in a particular period of time, right? Or maybe the number of product releases that legal is able to accelerate, and also to ensure that it's compliant with regulations. So those are examples of ways that you can kind of tie into the business objectives. Alon, do you have any other examples that you can share with the audience on this?
Yeah, and this can be something I actually love this area, but it can be difficult for me. I go back to the principles I learned on TQM, total quality management, and concepts of the value chain and the value stream. And so, there are particular ways, and I'm happy to talk more about it in the Q&A, because it's just another methodology. But just briefly, value is a customer perception of the usefulness and necessity of a product or service at a particular cost and competition and elimination of waste. And so in order to create value, there's a stream of activities that happen, and they improve it. And so there's the idea of the pizza parlor gets all its ingredients, the way that they make the dough, and then they add the cheese, and then they bake it, is now more valuable than the raw materials that came in. And so each activity step in making the pizza can add value, not add value, but be required for another value adding step, or not add value and not be required for another value adding step. And that is called waste, number 3. And so a good place to start for you is to look at a particular value stream in your organization. Let's pick the sales contract review process, and to look at the points your team negotiated and won over the last quarter. So what buckets do these legal win points fall into? Did you win points that are in the waste bucket? So did these points not add any value themselves, and there's not actually anybody else in the company that relies on that thing you won? And if that's the case, why spend any time on that in the future, right? And so that's how I start to look at how to connect up to the business, is, looking truly at value, looking at every step and picking something, and then just diving deep. And I've assembled a list of sort of 30 ways to add value for a business, and these are generic. And I want to tell you that only one out of the 30 is risk reduction. And so there are 29 other ways to add value, and happy to go into that later on if people want to. I think for this point, it's just, it can seem daunting, but there are so many things we do. And so, you can maybe try to categorize that. I know, Kathy, you might have something here about, trying to look at the categories of things, but pick something and then dive deep, and you'll find your metrics.
That's a great piece of advice, is just tying it back to value. And I think, in the chat, what I'm seeing some comments around, for legal departments that are more focused on regulatory matters, right? Maybe, privacy related issues. It's looking at the quality of advice and answers that's really critical for those functions, and not just maybe looking at speed to completion. And so I think using your framework of really looking at where does legal provide the most value, and still looking for ways that you can quantify that, becomes very, very powerful.
All right. Well, fortunately, we actually have prepared a slide to really look on some impact, revenue, and acceleration. And I want to take just a moment to try to look at this. So this is an example of what I showed you. And this is, there's not data from my Streamline implementation, but we get this data out of our Streamline implementation. But, I gave you some rough stuff from our last QBR, but here's some actual data to look at. And so you can see here that this data shows you that when a request is submitted, it generally sits for 1.25 days before it is assigned. It then spends 5.25 days in review, and then it waits 3 days for approval. And then in total, it's 11.75 days. So that's excellent. And, I guess you could look at different states and different things. But now the magic is in the waiting on details. So when you look under the hood is that there's this guy, Mike, and it takes 5 days every time Mike has to review things. And so that delays sales deals by 5 days. So why is Mike reviewing? What is Mike reviewing? How could Mike get the data faster, to, his review? And how do we figure that out? And then looking at also, I would also pick on the internal approval point that's down there. I like approvals as much as the next person, but we all know that approvals at the end, when everything is done, cannot add that much value. And so I go back to what value was added by this 2-day delay? And so, this is the kind of you can pick on different things. You might also say that 1.25 days for waiting is too long. And so you can talk to your team about why is it taking us so long before somebody grabs a task to do, right? Maybe for your business, 1.25 days is fine, but you could pick on different things, and at different times over the year, you can have initiatives that target each one of these metrics. And so just with this little bit, you can really dive into it. And so to me, this is one of those really great examples, and that I wanted to share with you guys today.
Thanks, Alon. Some of these reports have resulted in, our customers having huge aha moments, just like you explained. The most dramatic being a single individual holding up deals that they are assigned to approve on average by 60 days. And that was just shocking, right? There's 60 days of waste because this person didn't really even realize the role they're supposed to play in the approvals process. So simply by making a change to that reviewer, to that approver, everything sped up dramatically. So generally, a good way, basic framework that you can use to identify, what is a good KPI is that the KPI should really either 1, tell you how your department is doing, or 2, show you what areas to focus on and to improve, right? Which is what Alon talked about, picking one and really focusing on that. And at the end of the day, you really just want the data to be actionable. So it's not just about collecting the numbers for the sake of it. It's what decisions can you actually drive? What improvements can you make based on the data? So let's keep moving here. And, I think time well spent before you embark on a KPI exercise is, first of all, just to decide and do this mapping exercise, high-level exercise as a team, to look at what goals you want to achieve, right? How do you want the legal team to be perceived, for example? Maybe your goal is, hey, we want our brand to be that we are a huge money saver for the company. Or even better yet, we actually want to be seen as a revenue enabler for the company, right? You can see how that would take you down 2 very different directions on what KPIs to track. Lots of other examples here that are possible too around, what those big overarching goals and initiatives could be. And I'll share one that could be a little bit controversial too, which is we want to change legal's perception as a cost center. That's something that I think many legal departments sort of just live with as a de facto status. We're just dealing with it because that's how it shows up on the financial statements, is we're lumped in with G&A, and that's always a cost center. Well, I've actually worked at 2 companies where that may be the case on the financial statements, but that's not how the business views legal at all. It's never talking about legal as a cost center. And that is a huge boon because it means that in that situation, you don't have to fight for resources, and there's not going to be the same level of constraint, always looking at how much money you're able to save, right? And you can do that. You can achieve that brand of actually being a revenue enabler through the data, right, that you're bringing to the table. You can also start with the pain as well, right? And list out the problems that you are encountering and decide, how do we actually use data to solve these problems? So Alon, anything else you would like to add here?
Yeah, I mean, we have these quality points, and we're talking about quantity and quality. So I think the quantity is important, and I think on the next slide we have the idea of having, actionable things, but also quality, not quantity. And I really believe in that. So less is more, especially when you start out, especially because also, you're going to have to report on a metric once you do it regularly. And so you start small, you experiment, you check it in your team. Once you pick it, right, it is now a key metric. And so I would pick 2 to 3 things that are key areas and, take things that you can report on without spending too much time. And don't underestimate even very simple measures. For example, one of the things that I shared already is the type of requests. And just pointing out to the business and reporting on what the legal team is spending its time on is already big, because again, most people don't know what the lawyers are doing every day. And then the other one that was really helpful to me was measuring how many urgent requests we received. I use a legal priority classification that I developed over time. And one of the things that I always get pushback on from the team when I initially deploy it is that I allow the business to set their own priority. They want to call it a P1 or a P0 emergency, they can do it. And I execute to the priority classification. And so, I have had one time where somebody submitted a P0 emergency, and I immediately shot an email to the CEO saying, legal team's dropping everything, we have an emergency. And then the CEO wanted to know what the emergency was, and I communicated it. And then the CEO called that business person, and we never got another P0 out of that team ever again. And the other one I do is I sit down with the business leaders at the end of the quarter. And I say, your team submitted 60% P1 requests. And you're supposed to have one P1 at a time in your function. And these are disrupting work for everybody else. So maybe 60% urgent requests from your team means that there's some better planning that could be done. And so these very, very simple things are very hard to anecdotally talk about, but are very easy to talk about once you start tracking them.
It's a great example, Alon. It actually reminds me of something I saw during my time at DoorDash too, where because we were tracking how much work, how much demand each of the different business teams we were working with was sending to us, and we could see the trend, right? It's increasing by 30% quarter on quarter. I could go back to those business teams and say, hey, if you don't resource us better, then our SLAs are going to fall by, it's going to push out by this many days. And I could show very, very concrete calculations. And as a result, that quarter, my team actually got 4 incremental heads, not from finance, but actually from these different business teams, because they gifted us with their heads, which is pretty unheard of, right? For legal teams. So that's a benefit that you could drive. All right, Alon, do you want to share this poll since I did the last one?
Yeah, so we were curious to hear, what are your challenges in tracking, legal metrics and KPIs? And so choices here are data being scattered across different systems, not knowing which KPIs to track, manual tracking processes, lack of technology or tools, difficulty in interpreting the data, getting buy-in to track it, or something else. And it looks like we have actually some standouts, but it's more evenly spaced out between, the knowledge about KPIs and what to track, manual tracking processes, and lack of technology or tools. And and while we're waiting for these to come in, we've been picking a lot on sales, and that sales creates a lot of urgent requests. And I saw a bunch of things in the chat. If you start tracking urgent requests, one of the things that you'll find is you're going to start seeing the engineering team, depending on where you are, or procurement, coming with super urgent things at the end of the quarter, because this pricing is going to expire at the end of the quarter and you must, close the deal right now. And so, that actually causes also some interference with sales activities. But, in my experience, it's always held true. You're going to find things in the data. And so you might actually have not just sales, but also, a conversation with your engineering leader to talk about how those are sales tactics. Don't worry, that pricing will still be available next week. So, but it does look like voting has stabilized, Kathy. So I think we could look at the results.
Yeah. And Shai, I don't know if you want to come back in here at all to share the results. I'm happy to as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
It looks like, we have a pretty close tie between the top 2 categories, which is not knowing which KPIs to track and manual tracking processes. So hopefully this presentation is going to help a little bit in demystifying the first one. And then we'll talk a little more too about how to overcome the burden of manually tracking processes, and the lack of technology in doing so exactly kind of dovetails into that. And then we have, you know, in the other categories, getting buy-in to track and finding that difficult, and data being scattered across different systems, but those seem like not as commonly existing as the top few. All right, awesome. So now moving on to some really concrete examples of KPIs that you can consider tracking. And again, the recommendation here is to tie those to specific outcomes that you'd like to advance or problems that you'd like to solve, and the less is more. So request volume, we found, is a very helpful metric to track in order to understand the demand on legal resources, right? It's one thing to tell finance, we're super busy, we're at risk of people burning out on the team, that's why I need more headcount. It's 100% more impactful, especially to finance, given how their minds work, to say our request volume is increasing 30% every quarter, right? Like the example I gave earlier, we're at risk of pushing out our SLAs by 3 days on average on all sales agreements, and that's resulting in us, you know, being slower to recognize this amount of revenue over a given quarter. And if you can get even more granular with that and show request volume broken out by matter type, and also the business teams that are generating the most demand, right, then you can refine your analysis even further. One of our customers actually tracks the number of legal requests that ultimately legal has to reject or cancel because the request didn't follow company policy. And it was then possible for them to track which teams are causing the greatest amount of wasted legal resources. That's legal time that's spent reviewing, trying to unpack and understand something that ultimately was never going to go through. So it's not about playing the blame game, right? They weren't trying to throw anyone under the bus. They actually sat down with the leader of that business function to discuss the results and really bring some very concrete examples to the table and talk about, okay, what is the training that's necessary to drive the number down, which then they tracked over a given quarter. So, you know, I'm seeing in the chat, it's a difficult exercise to track, you know, in lots of cases, stuff that's not happening, because legal is also risk prevention. But Ilan and I are giving you lots and lots of examples of things that you can track, and start there, right? And show, you know, concrete value add by the legal department. So Ilan, I'm going to pass it over to you now. I know you have more examples to share.
Yeah, and just reacting to that statement around the risk reduction and tracking what hasn't happened. In fact, I think you can actually track what hasn't happened. This might be easier for those of you in public companies, but when you know, even in private companies, you know, your accounting team has reserves for certain things, and your ability to drive down risk actually drives down those reserves. And depending on the size of your company, there could be a huge financial impact from a risk reduction in particular areas of operation. And you know, looking at that again, go back to the value stream, and you know, risk reduction is one of the 30 ways to add value. You know, how are you reducing risk, and where that happens is, you know, key. And so you can look at that, and you can, with partnering with your accounting, look at, so what would it take to reduce this reserve? Like, what do we have to do to get that reserve off? Because, you know, by reducing that, you're actually creating a positive change in the balance sheet of the company. I just want to give another really specific example on KPI for legal. I've used this one, and it's about billing disputes and overdue collection. You know, we all have AR. AR gets overdue. Usually it goes in patterns where it builds up, and then there's an effort to drive it down. But just in general, you know, start measuring how long are things taken when legal is involved. You know, because you know how long AR is overdue, and you can tell that, you know, oh yeah, we send our 5th Dunning letter and nothing's happening because, you know, it's the same form that's been in use for 4 years. Like, what could you do better there? And the other one is looking for trends and patterns. So for example, I look for a trend between size of deal and when legal is brought in and how early, right? And so I'd like to see, when I look at the distribution of things legal is involved in, that there's some sort of correlation there that shows that as things are bigger, we get brought in earlier. So it's okay to wait maybe on the smaller things. And most of the time when I look at it, if it hasn't been actively managed, you actually see no correlation at all. It's just almost random distribution of when legal is called in to help. And even on big things and, tons of dollars on AR, you just kind of like, so, I want to see that trend. And so I would suggest that's a great KPI also to start with. Just, how are we getting dollars in the door? I like
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, that's such an interesting data point, right? Like if you're not actually approaching it systematically, then there's no correlation. And so back to your prioritization point, how can you prioritize your time if there's, there's no systematic way, no process around doing it effectively? Okay, so now let's talk about KPIs, examples of KPIs for commercial legal. So we all know here that commercial legal lends itself very, very nicely to tracking metrics because there is a high volume of discrete matters that come through. So this is a great place to get started if you're wondering which areas of the legal department shall I focus on with this exercise. And, we've given some examples on looking at volume and breaking it down by type. And you can also, look at time metrics, right? Look at how long is it taking for the legal team to engage in that first response, because usually that's the most time consuming to review the first red line, how long it's taking to close approvals out, or how long it's taking to complete the entire request. And it's really slicing and then dicing the data in these different ways that you get to the trends that Alon is talking about. An example that, I can come up with as well is looking at exceptions actually to your standard policies. So this is something that I learned about through actually one of our customers. They track the number of exceptions. So for example, you're willing to accept limitation of liability thresholds that are higher than your average for a specific deal. And they look at the number of these exceptions that they're giving in a particular quarter, and they correlate that by contract size. So they're able then to sit down with the sales leader and have very meaningful conversations. For example, they'll say, hey, we actually noticed that there was a spike in the last quarter, and we agreed to all these exceptions for contracts that are actually below our materiality threshold. For example, below $50,000. Like, why is that happening? Does that actually make sense? Is that something we want to happen as a business? So you can see that you can have a very nuanced conversation with other business leaders based on the data, right, that you're able to surface and bring to the table. Alon, could you provide some additional color on this from your experience?
Yeah, and I want to just also point out that the high volume of commercial work at most companies really lends itself well to doing metrics. And so if you're just starting out, this is a really good place to start. And the other one is that you can break out. So because when in our way of measuring things with our tool, particular sales requests are identified differently than other ones automatically. And so I can actually track these same time metrics specifically for sales support. And just, prioritization itself, right? I just, we talked about it briefly, but just start tracking these little things and then thinking about also turnaround times and expectation on resolution. So, one of the things in my experience was, and this might surprise many on this call, but I had set an SLA based on the resourcing available to me of 7 days. And so, in a discussion was like, how many lawyers do we have? Well, how much work do we expect, et cetera? I said, okay, so with this staffing, 7 days is the SLA. Things are going to get done much faster most of the time, but no complaints if, things are happening within the 7-day time period. And if we want more, performance, we need to have more resources, just like any other function in the business. This wasn't for NDAs. NDAs had a 24-hour thing, but again, we should actually not sign any more NDAs at all. And there's a free service beyond NDA if you want to check it out to do that. But in any case, 7 days on the SLAs. And so what's important was be able to show how many requests we did in a shorter time while still protecting that SLA, right? To say, yeah, but look, yes, it's true. Sometimes, maybe 1 or 2 were above it, but tracking that and consistently, reporting on it will help you also defend your turnaround times and expectational resolution and have discussions around more resources.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that really helpful example, Alon. Okay, moving on to, I believe this is the last and final poll. What tools does your team currently use to track legal metrics? Are you currently using spreadsheets? Are you using a dedicated intake and workflow software? Do you have a ticketing software? Are you using your CLM to do this work? Maybe you've custom built some internal tools like Elon, who coded his own instance of Jira some time ago.
Don't
Maybe
do that. Not recommended.
the number of teams I've spoken to that spend like 6 months to a year to customize Jira, it's definitely a journey. Or maybe you're doing something else. And then the final option is that you're not doing anything at all currently, which, wow, it's 27% of people are not tracking metrics at all currently.
And hey, Kathy and Ilan, I'm just going to jump on. Want to just say thank you for, I know we have some more program to come, but I just want to say thank you for a wonderful program so far. Chat is super engaged, lots of great questions. Shout out to Melody answering good questions behind the scenes. Folks, if you have questions, and I saw Beth submitted a question, and a lot of people are interested in Alon, what you're using to track and implementation and budget and all that good stuff. We'll tackle that in just a few more minutes. But definitely, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. All right, back to Kathy and Alon to debrief the poll and to go from there.
Thank you so much. So I recognize, Shai, that we actually only have a few minutes left in today's presentation. So rather than spending longer on the poll, and I think we can share the results out afterwards, I'd love to end with this final slide, and then we can take questions. And that is to share what are the best practices for tracking metrics. And I think, as we're seeing in the poll results, approaching this manually is absolutely not recommended. It's very, very time consuming, and it would, results in ultimately people, I think, giving up on it because it takes so long, or you're hiring someone and that's their job is just to manage this. It's just not a very efficient way of approaching, tracking the data. So Alon, do you have any suggestions on leveraging technology for the team, for the audience?
Yes, I do. And I know we just hated on, my Jira implementation I did. And I did that because there was no budget. And at that point I needed something. And, so I'm intimately familiar with Jira and its limitation. I've tried 1,000 different ways to do it. The one key takeaway is that trying to do something manual and manual collection of data is not good, because what you're doing is actually increasing your headcount. And how likely are you to actually be willing to report on this consistently? And don't think that people aren't going to forget when, that you used to have a metric when you stop reporting it. So, I did do a simple Jira thing, and I set it up, and it was service desk inside Jira, and it had 4 states. And so I could tell some few metrics, but it is not giving you any granular data that is that useful. So the way I started and the way I just did the deployment at 8x8, and I really believe in simple deployments, good deployment, is have your selection of KPIs be part of the selection of your tool. So you either, you know what you need and you know what you want, then you can pick a tool that supports that automatically. And this is not a exaggeration, but I picked Streamline because it could deliver the thing I cared about the most. One, the automated assignment that it supports the various flows, and it could have the time tracking the way I wanted it, so that we would know what time is spent on our side, what time is spent with either other parts of the business, or, basically our waiting on time. I think that data is critical. And it's one of the reasons why when Kathy described this to me many years ago, I thought, oh my God, this is like the best approach. And so, I would say that if you have to have one thing you focus on, I would say focus on this. Focus on figuring out your metrics so that you can show what time is spent where. And then the prioritization, of course. And so, that's my recommendation to you as a best practice.
Thank you so much, Alon. And I know just how many tools you've looked at, and you truly are an expert in designing effective KPIs and presenting them in a way that drives really great decisions and improvements for your entire function, elevates the entire team. So thank you. I want to say a massive thank you for In-House Connect, to Shai, to give us this platform to share our experience and learnings with everyone. I want to thank the audience for joining us in this discussion. I loved how active the chat was. If we weren't able to answer your question directly, please follow up with us. We're on LinkedIn. Add both me and Alon. We're very happy to engage with you outside of this presentation as well. And we hope that, at the very end of the day, we hope we just got you excited about embedding metrics in the way that you run your legal team. And that is the biggest goal that we had coming out of this. So huge thanks to Alon for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with all of us on this topic as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you so much, Alon. Thank you so much, Streamline. Thank you so much, Melody, as well. She did a great job behind the scenes. Alon, do you want to say any last words before we sign off?
Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I love metrics, etc. I just want to give one more shout out to Beyond NDA. If you're really not interested in signing NDAs anymore, I started this myself. It's just me. I just want to try to change the world and stop the craziness around NDAs. So check us out at www.beyondnda.com.